In this example, we're going to be looking at using a fixed loop to repeat instructions. So in Python, if I wanted to display something 10 times or 100 times, I would have to use the print line, hello world, and I would need to write that line of code as many times as I wanted to display it. So if I wrote it 3 times, it comes out as 3. And that's not much of an issue when it's only a few repetitions you need, but if it was 1,000 or 1,000,000 times, that's obviously going to take a lot of lines of code and becomes very unmanageable. So what we can do is we can use a fixed loop. And a fixed loop is just a way of repeating instructions. The syntax for this is for, and you tell it how many times you want to repeat. So I'm going to say for counter in range, and range has a pair of brackets, and then you give it a number. So I'm going to say 10. So in range 10, and you put a colon. So for counter in range 10, that line just says repeat everything underneath 10 times, and you can put any line underneath you would like to repeat. So if I said print hello world, it's going to print that out 10 times. And on the surface, that's all you really need to be able to repeat instructions, but there is a wee bit more going on here. So for example, this word counter, for counter in range 10, the counter is just a variable that's keeping track of how many times it is repeating. So instead of putting the hello world string in there, I could put the variable counter, because it is a variable that's being used. And if I run that, you see the numbers 0 to 9 are actually displayed, because the computer starts counting from 0, or Python does. So counter, when it's first created, so for counter in range, it creates a variable called counter, and it gives it a value of 0. And then each time this loop repeats, it increments it by 1 by default. There are ways of controlling that, but by default it increments it by 1. So it will go from 0 up until the number before this. So from 0 to 9. So it does it 10 times, it's just using different numbers. The word counter itself doesn't need to be counter, because it's just a variable. We can give it any value you want. And if you were to look up programming examples online, then you might see a lot of single letter use. So for example, I, which could maybe stand for iterations. So for I in range 10, print I, and that does the same thing. It'll just print the numbers 0 to 9. If I was to change this number in here, 100, it's going to print the numbers 0 to 99. The reason we use the word counter is just to make it clear that what that variable is doing. But it's up to you whether you want to use I or J or a variable word like counter that makes more sense to you. And as we increment the number of loops here, so for counter in range, and if I make it, what's that, 10,000, and I run that, you can start to see the use. So there's the numbers from 0 all the way up to 9,999. And that's the basics of a fixed loop. It's used for repeating instructions, and the syntax is for counter in range.